Michael Grant sat alone at the kitchen table, the remnants of dinner cold on his plate. The clock on the microwave blinked 9:47 p.m. Julia, his wife of 12 years, was late again. Over the past month, these late nights at the office had become distressingly routine. Supposedly, she was finalizing grant reports or catching up on paperwork for Healing Hands, the charity she led. Yet something didn't add up. Michael drummed his fingers on the table, his mind replaying the inconsistencies that had begun to gnaw at him. They shared everything: goals, values, even a synced digital calendar to coordinate their busy lives. Julia had always been diligent about updating it. In their household, transparency was a given, a value both held dear. So when those late-night sessions started popping up, Michael naturally checked their shared calendar for context. Nothing. No board meetings, no donor dinners, no scheduled evening work entries at all. He had returned late from a client consultation and found the house unusually dark and silent. Their cozy, craftsman-style home, usually aglow with warm light and life at that hour, felt cold and unfamiliar. The front porch light, which Hannah normally kept on for him, was off. Her car was in the driveway, but she wasn't curled up in the living room with a book as she often would be. Confused, Brennan made his way inside, rainwater dripping from his coat. The living room was empty, the kitchen spotless and cold. He flicked on a lamp and happened to glance at the digital clock on the stove. 11:05 p.m. 2 minutes later, he heard the faint creak of the side gate, followed by the soft click of a key in the lock. He stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, just as the side door, the narrow door that led from the garage to the kitchen, swung open. In slipped Hannah, her silhouette briefly framed by the drizzle outside before she shut the door gently behind her. She hadn't seen him. They often brainstormed together for work. It wasn't unusual for him to lend a hand. But Julia's reaction had been swift and oddly defensive. She froze for a split second before flashing a tight smile. "That's sweet, Mike, but it's really technical board data. Confidential stuff. I can't share it, not even with you," she had replied, voice light but eyes avoiding his. That moment hung between them. Confidential doesn't mean secret, he thought. As CFO of another nonprofit, Michael knew all about confidentiality. Sensitive information is handled carefully, but spouses working in the same sector often bounce ideas off each other without breaching trust. Her excuse felt like an unnecessary wall, one that hadn't been there before. He remembered watching her bustle out the door that evening, laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Julia had given him a quick peck on the cheek. "Don't wait up," she'd said softly. The new perfume Hannah only seemed to wear on Wednesdays. The way she guarded her phone lately, never leaving it face up on the table. The nights she came home smelling vaguely of whiskey when she'd claimed to be at a dry business meeting. Individually, he might have brushed these off as quirks or work stress. But now, each detail felt like another puzzle piece snapping into place, forming a picture he wished he didn't recognize. Brennan stayed frozen in place until he heard the distant creak of the bedroom door closing upstairs. Only then did he exhale the breath he'd been holding. His hands were trembling, an icy mix of dread and anger coursing through him. He had his first clue. Now he needed proof. Brennan eventually slipped into bed beside Hannah that night without waking her. But sleep refused to come. Lying in the darkness, he listened to the soft rhythm of her breathing and wondered what secrets might lie behind her serene façade. It was the first of many nights he would spend like this. Eyes open, heart pounding quietly in his chest, as far from peace as he'd ever been. The next morning, Brennan pretended nothing was amiss. Over breakfast, Hannah was chatty, if a bit tired around the eyes, and quick with a warm smile as she packed lunch for their 7-year-old son, Ethan. Brennan sipped his coffee and studied her covertly. She carried on about a new project at her law firm, carefully avoiding his gaze whenever he murmured a response. When she kissed Ethan goodbye and headed off to work in her sleek sedan, Brennan remained at the table, turning the events of the previous night over and over in his mind. If Hannah was stepping out on him, she was doing it with an accountant's precision, meticulously timed and deliberately concealed. Brennan's jaw tightened. Whatever was happening, he resolved to handle it the way he would handle an investigation, methodically, discreetly, and with unyielding determination. Gathering proof, quietly true to his training, Brennan didn't confront Hannah immediately. Instead, he spent the next 3 weeks quietly compiling evidence with the same meticulous care he once devoted to logging footprints at a crime scene. Each Wednesday came and went with Hannah repeating her ghost-like late-night arrivals, and each clue Brennan gathered only steeled his resolve further. It was a strange sort of double life. By day, Brennan was the polite husband and dutiful father, hiding his simmering anger behind routine conversations and half-hearted smiles. By night, he transformed into an investigator stalking his own wife's secrets. More than once, he lay awake in the early hours, staring at the ceiling beside a sleeping Hannah and wondering if he should just shake her awake and demand the truth. But each time, the thought of her lying to his face again, or denying everything despite the evidence, kept him silent. A big part of that growth was thanks to a new donor relations consultant she'd hired last year, Daniel Wu, a smooth-talking strategist with a reputation for unlocking donor generosity. In fact, Daniel's efforts had reportedly helped Healing Hands triple its fundraising in under 18 months. The board at Healing Hands loved him. Julia often sang Daniel's praises at home, too. Michael had met Daniel a handful of times at charity mixers and events. The man was charming, all right, polished and affable, with an easy smile that could put anyone at ease. Michael recalled a particular evening 8 months ago, a celebratory dinner after Healing Hands landed $1 million grant. Julia had invited Michael to join the team at a downtown restaurant. Daniel was there, toasting Julia's leadership. He had been utterly courteous to Michael, asking insightful questions about Michael's own nonprofit work. He fetched his personal planner from a drawer and cross-referenced each date of those charges with their family calendar. Every single charge aligned with a night Hannah had told him she was working late or out for a team dinner. One date in particular made Brennan's grip on the papers tremble. It was the night of Ethan's school pageant, an evening Hannah had missed, claiming a client meeting had run long. Brennan remembered sitting in the auditorium with Ethan nervously fidgeting by his side, an empty seat next to them. He remembered the hurt in his son's eyes when Hannah never showed. Now he knew where she had been, sharing drinks at the Lantern while her family waited in vain. The betrayal cut deep. Brennan swallowed against a surge of anger and forced himself to remain analytical. He also noted with grim relief that he didn't see any charges for hotels or suspicious gifts on her bills. Perhaps a small mercy, or simply evidence that Hannah and Daniel confined their affair to those whiskey-fueled nights and the privacy of Daniel's world. He highlighted each Lantern visit on the statements and made copies for his records. These pieces of paper, small and nondescript, were proof that Hannah's double life had tangible traces. Still, printed statements weren't enough for Brennan. He wanted to see the place with his own eyes. The next night, he decided to pay a quiet visit to the Lantern. It was a sleek, upscale bar with low amber lighting and polished mahogany surfaces. Brennan slipped onto a stool in the early evening, blending with the after-work crowd in his blazer and open-collared shirt, and ordered a bourbon neat. As he sipped the smoky liquor, he glanced around the room. Was this where Hannah and Daniel sat close together in a corner booth, whispering over drinks while he was at home reading Ethan a bedtime story? The thought made his grip tighten around the glass. In the mirror behind the bar, he watched a laughing couple cozied up in a booth by the far wall. For an irrational moment, Brennan's vision blurred, and he imagined it was Hannah, tilting her head toward Daniel in intimate conversation. He blinked the illusion away and took another slow sip to steady himself. When the bartender came by again, Brennan cleared his throat and nodded toward the back booths. "Busy place for a weeknight," he said lightly. The bartender, a genial man with rolled-up shirt sleeves, chuckled. "Wednesdays get a decent crowd. We have our regulars." "Nice spot," Brennan lied, projecting a friendly ease. "First time here. Actually..." He pulled out his phone as if checking a message. "I'm supposed to meet a colleague. When Julia finally slipped into bed close to midnight, he lay still, feigning sleep. He felt her lie down cautiously, perhaps sensing the rift forming between them. In the darkness, Michael's eyes stung. Whether from exhaustion or the threat of tears, he wasn't sure. He kept his breathing steady and pretended not to notice when Julia quietly sighed, as if carrying a heavy burden of her own. Before dawn, Michael rose and brewed coffee, determination stirring within him, along with the coffee grounds. If there was betrayal afoot, he would bring everything to light, the right way. The wheels of Michael's mind were already turning, plotting a path to uncover the truth without losing himself in the process. The first rays of sun found him at the kitchen table once again, a man resolved. He would seek transparency, that value he held so dear, and he would let the facts speak for themselves. 2. The bartender's innocent words burned like acid. Brennan could picture Hannah perched on a stool right here, her face alight and animated in a way he hadn't seen in years, leaning into Daniel's shoulder as he whispered something that made her laugh. He paid his tab and left a generous tip before stepping out into the cool night. The city lights of downtown Cleveland blurred red and white in the drizzle as he walked to his car. He had sought confirmation of what he already suspected, and now he had it in spades. Each new discovery was another nail in the coffin of his marriage, and another weapon in the arsenal he was building for what came next. Parking lot logs. Next, Brennan turned his attention to Daniel Travers, the man he suspected was Hannah's secret lover. Travers hosted a popular late-night talk show on WCLR, Cleveland's local radio station. Brennan guessed that on the nights Hannah slipped away, she might have been meeting Daniel at or after his broadcasts. Ellen replied thoughtfully. We have regular internal reviews, of course, but our last independent audit was maybe 2 years ago? Why do you ask? Michael leaned back in the driver's seat, one hand idly loosening his tie. Well, in my experience, donors really appreciate transparency. Given the big uptick in donations, it might be a good time to do a routine audit, just to reassure everyone that all that new money is being handled impeccably. I know Julia has always championed accountability. In fact, she's the one who inspired some of our practices. I'm sure she'd agree it's prudent to double-check your financials with an outside expert. He hated invoking Julia's name like this, but it was true. Julia often spoke about the importance of independent audits. She wouldn't dare oppose the idea publicly, not without raising suspicion. He could almost hear Ellen nodding on the other end. That's a fair point, Ellen said. Especially with the gala coming up and so many donors in one place. It could be nice to share that we've just completed an independent audit to boost confidence. Michael's heart skipped at the mention of the gala. He'd nearly forgotten that the annual Hope Gala was only a few weeks away. It was the biggest event of the year for Healing Hands, where major donors, community leaders, and press gathered to celebrate the charity's work. Julia had been working tirelessly on it for months. The timing was interesting. Exactly, Michael replied. If you'd like, I can recommend a reputable audit firm. In fact, I'd be happy to volunteer some time to coordinate with them since I know the financial lingo, just to help move things along quickly before the gala. That would be fantastic, Michael, Ellen agreed gratefully. I'll bring it up with the executive committee today. I doubt anyone will object, Julia included. We all know you have impeccable integrity. Having you liaise on the audit will make it go smoothly. After hanging up, Michael exhaled slowly. Step 1 was in motion. He felt a pang of conflict. He was effectively going behind Julia's back to instigate a check on her organization. But he reminded himself this was above board. Healing Hands belonged to the public trust, not to Julia. If something improper was happening, the board had every right to know. And if nothing was amiss, then no harm done. At least donors would have reassurance. That afternoon, Michael received an email confirming the plan. The board had authorized an immediate independent financial audit. Julia's response was included in the chain. She wrote, "Of course, I welcome the audit. Transparency is one of Healing Hands' core values. Michael read her words twice, trying to detect any hint of distress between the lines. None was obvious. Publicly, she played the cooperative leader. But he wondered what she thought in private. Did her stomach flip when she heard the idea? Or was she confident nothing could be found? The audit firm, a respected independent accounting team, arrived later that week to begin their review at Healing Hands. True to his offer, Michael made himself available as a volunteer liaison. Officially, he was just helping facilitate, given his financial background. Unofficially, he wanted to see every number, every document. On Thursday morning, he walked into the Healing Hands offices under the guise of friendly support. It felt strange coming in as something other than Julia's husband. He was greeted by staff who knew him well. After all, Michael had been part of the charity's extended family for years, attending events, occasionally advising on budgeting. The atmosphere was cordial, but he noticed a tension in Julia when they briefly crossed paths in the hallway. She approached him with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for helping out, Michael. The auditors are in the conference room." "Let me know if you or they need anything," Julia said. Her tone was polite, but there was a tightness around her mouth. "I'm sure it'll go smoothly," he replied, matching her professional tone. "It's great that Healing Hands is doing this proactively." He met her gaze, searching for the woman he knew. Julia's expression remained unreadable, a mask of executive composure. She gave a slight nod and walked away briskly, heels clicking on the polished floor. Michael took a breath and proceeded to the conference room where two auditors had set up shop. Laptops, stacks of ledgers, and files were spread out on the table. One of them, a graying man in a crisp suit named Alan Ross, shook Michael's hand. "Good to see you, Michael. We appreciate your assistance. We know you have a vested interest in this organization's success. If there's anything you need, documents, clarification on nonprofit accounting quirks, just ask," Michael said, taking a seat. She had let her usually neat hair down in loose waves and wore the plum-colored peacoat she typically reserved for special occasions. Details she hadn't bothered with in months when they went out as a family. As Daniel unlocked a sleek silver BMW parked at the curb, Hannah rested a hand lightly on his back, a brief, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. Daniel opened the passenger door of his car, and Hannah slipped inside, casting a quick glance over her shoulder, a reflex to check if anyone was watching. Brennan held his breath and remained absolutely still behind the planters, finger clicking the shutter repeatedly. In that moment, through the lens, his wife looked like a stranger. A woman stepping into a lover's car under the cloak of night. A woman who had mastered deception in plain sight of everyone who loved her. Once Daniel rounded the hood and got into the driver's seat, the BMW's headlights ignited and the car pulled into the street. Under a benign category labeled Staff Training and Development, he saw repeated payments to Wu Consulting LLC, Daniel's firm. They were logged as vendor training sessions. The odd thing was the amounts. Each invoice was about twice the typical rate for a consultant in their region. Michael knew market prices well. Daniel was being paid a small fortune, far beyond reason. He flagged it casually to the auditors. "These consultant fees seem a bit high for training sessions, don't they? Could we pull the original invoices and any contracts related to Wu Consulting?" Alan nodded and jotted a note. The original invoices were retrieved. Michael's jaw tightened as he read them. Each monthly retainer invoice from Daniel's company described services in vague terms: strategic donor outreach training and capacity building workshops. But there were no detailed reports of these supposed trainings, no attendee lists, no dates of workshops conducted. Essentially, Daniel was billing for nebulous services, and Julia had approved those payments. If those invoices were legit, surely Julia would have mentioned these trainings, perhaps even invited other staff. She hadn't. Moreover, the total sums over the past year were staggering. Daniel's firm had been paid well above 6 figures. Michael felt anger simmering. Healing Hands was a mid-sized charity. Every dollar meant vaccinations, clinic supplies, real impact. To see so much money potentially misused, it was not just a marital betrayal, it was a moral one. He didn't jump to conclusions yet, but the seed of outrage planted itself in his chest. Next, Michael reviewed travel and meeting logs. He requested all records of travel reimbursements and site visits, especially any involving Daniel. One entry stood out. Daniel had repeatedly filed for travel expenses for site visits to a city clinic project located downtown, the same city where Healing Hands headquarters were. Brennan slid the photo into a manila envelope, along with printouts of the credit card records, the valet's log note, and a USB drive containing the hallway camera footage. He tied the envelope's string tightly and placed it in a small wall safe hidden behind a bookshelf. These were the facts, the truth of what Hannah had done, all neatly compiled and secure under lock and key. Before leaving his office, Brennan stepped across the hall to gently push open Ethan's bedroom door. The nightlight cast a soft blue glow over the room. He could make out his son's small form curled up under the covers, one arm wrapped around a threadbare stuffed dinosaur. Ethan was sleeping soundly, his face peaceful and innocent, blissfully unaware of the storm that was gathering in his family. Brennan felt a tightness in his throat as he watched the child breathe in and out, each soft exhale a reminder of what truly mattered. Julia and Daniel had effectively used Healing Hands funds to finance their private rendezvous. They likely met under the pretense of work, billing the charity so their affairs expenses looked like organizational business. Michael's throat felt dry. He left the conference room briefly, walking down the hall to get a drink of water from the cooler. He needed a moment to steady himself. The betrayal was no longer just a vague fear. It was stark, black and white on paper. As he sipped the water, he saw Julia down the corridor speaking with her assistant. She looked stressed, rubbing her temple as she spoke. For an instant, a pang of empathy hit him. She, too, had been under immense pressure with the gala and work. But then he reminded himself, she had chosen to add deceit on top of that. She had chosen this path. Returning to the auditors, Michael felt more determined than ever to uncover everything. Is it possible to review selected email correspondence? He asked Alan and his partner. Perhaps any communications between leadership and major consultants or donors? The board would want to know if discussions with consultants align with these invoices. The auditors exchanged a glance. Accessing emails can be sensitive, but if there were irregularities with vendor payments, it wasn't out of scope. We might need board clearance for specific email reviews, Alan said slowly. Michael had anticipated that. I'll handle it, he replied. That evening, Michael formally invoked Healing Hands' whistleblower policy. Every reputable nonprofit had one, encouraging staff or stakeholders to report suspected misconduct. Under that policy, he filed a confidential report to the board's audit committee outlining concerns. Unusual payments to a consultant, without naming his personal connection to the situation. To justify reading emails, he focused on potential conflicts of interest and misuse of funds. The audit committee, which Ellen chaired, swiftly authorized the auditors, and Michael as liaison, to retrieve and review relevant emails between Julia, Daniel, and any mention of Wu Consulting or related projects. When the email archives were delivered, Michael braced himself. He sat alone in a quiet corner of the conference room after hours, the glow of a laptop screen reflecting in his glasses. With a few keywords and date filters, he found them. An email chain between Julia and Daniel that spanned months. As he clicked through, each message felt like a fresh wound. In one thread marked Re-Outreach Strategy Proposal, the tone between the lines was far from strictly professional. They discussed meeting schedules peppered with personal asides. Daniel wrote, "Let's make tomorrow's a strategy session more hands-on. I'll bring the wine." Julia responded, "You're terrible, LOL, but yes, more hands-on fundraising is exactly what I need." Reading those words, Michael's stomach churned. He forced himself to continue. Another email referenced a for-profit spin-off. Julia had written to Daniel about an idea to spin off part of Healing Hands' operations, specifically the clinic building initiative, into a separate for-profit company. If we structure it right, she wrote, the nonprofit can funnel initial grants into it, then private investors can jump in. I want you to have a stake, Daniel. With your talent, you deserve to share in the upside. I promise you'll get equity once we set it up. Our own venture, imagine. Doing well by doing good together. Michael's hands balled into fists. There it was. Julia was promising Daniel a personal financial reward out of what should be charitable work. It wasn't just an affair of the heart or body, it was an affair of principles. She was willing to betray the mission of Healing Hands for personal gain, and entice Daniel along with an ownership slice. It turned Michael's stomach. He found more. Emails where Julia and Daniel coordinated their stories. One exchange around the time of those strategy retreats had Julia instructing Daniel on how to write his invoices to avoid scrutiny. Maybe label it as training or outreach support, not consulting hours, keeps it looking routine. Daniel replied with a joking tone. Anything for you. Covering our tracks is my specialty. Each line Michael read felt like a hammer blow. He compiled copies of these emails, the invoices, the travel receipts, assembling them methodically into a confidential dossier. Late one night, as the cleaning crew vacuumed down the hall, Michael remained in the conference room with papers strewn before him. In front of him lay the undeniable truth of Julia's deception. Under the harsh fluorescent light, he finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of it. Tears of anger and sorrow welled in his eyes. He pressed a palm to his forehead, attempting to steady his breath. In that quiet moment, a painful resolve formed. Julia and Daniel had not only broken his trust, they had betrayed everyone who believed in them, from the board to the donors to the communities Healing Hands served. This was far bigger than a private indiscretion. It was a violation of the very ethos they all claimed to live by. Michael carefully closed the file folder containing the evidence. His hand hovered over it, trembling slightly, then firmly shut it. He knew what he had to do. Transparency was not just a buzzword, it was a moral imperative. They had built their careers on the idea that doing good required trust and integrity. Julia had forsaken that. So be it. Still, Michael wasn't vengeful by nature. On a personal level, he felt profound hurt, an urge to scream at Julia, to ask why she did this to them. But he swallowed that urge and took a different view. The truth needed to come out in the right way. Quietly confronting her behind closed doors might satisfy his personal grievances, but it wouldn't address the larger wrong. Julia and Daniel had abused the public's trust and the charity's resources. Exposing that in daylight was the only just course, both as retribution and as a lesson. As he turned off the laptop and prepared to leave, Michael remembered Ellen's passing remark about the upcoming gala. An idea began to crystallize in his mind. The Hope Gala was in 2 weeks, a perfect stage to set things right. It would be risky to air something so scandalous in a public forum. But wasn't that the point of true accountability? Besides, a part of him admitted, letting Julia and Daniel face the consequences under the gaze of those they duped had a poetic justice to it. Through the grapevine, Brennan learned that WCLR's general manager confronted Daniel Travers that very morning with the contents of the anonymous package. Daniel had reportedly gone pale and sputtered indignantly that it was all a misunderstanding, until the photograph was produced. At that point, the silver-tongued radio host fell into telling silence. Within an hour, security guards escorted Daniel out of the station in disgrace. The mighty voice of late-night Cleveland radio was left utterly speechless when faced with proof of his own transgressions. Brennan allowed himself a tight, private smile when he heard. It appeared station management had already acted on the tip. That evening, when Daniel's show normally would have aired, WCLR ran a pre-recorded program in his place. A live piano played gentle melodies as donors, community leaders, and staff celebrated Healing Hands accomplishments. At the entrance, a large banner read, Annual Hope Gala, Building Healthy Futures. Julia had truly outdone herself organizing the event. Every detail was impeccable. Michael adjusted his black bow tie with steady hands. Despite the turmoil inside him, his exterior was composed. As he stepped into the ballroom, he spotted Julia across the room playing the gracious host, radiant in a deep blue evening dress, her smile warm as she greeted a city councilman. For a moment, Michael felt a pang of sadness. She looked every bit the charismatic, dedicated leader he'd fallen for. How stark the contrast between that image and the deceit he now carried in his jacket pocket, a USB drive containing the presentation of her misdeeds. On the other side of the room, Daniel Wu was circulating among a cluster of wealthy donors. In his tailored suit and easy charm, he worked the crowd effortlessly, making each patron laugh or smile. Watching Daniel clap a hand on an older gentleman's shoulder, Michael felt a surge of anger. This man had helped triple the fundraising, yes, but under false pretenses. He had bolstered his success by betraying trust. It took all Michael's control not to glare openly. Instead, he greeted a couple of familiar donors with a polite smile, biding his time. The evening program was set to start soon. By arrangement with Ellen and the board, Michael had been given a small slot at the beginning of the speeches. Officially, he was invited to say a few words of thanks on behalf of the Financial Oversight Committee, a vaguely defined role the board had quietly slid him into for the night. Julia had been puzzled when the schedule draft showed Michael giving opening remarks, but Ellen smoothly explained that since he had helped with the audit coordination, it would be appropriate for him to share the good news of their financial diligence. Julia couldn't object without seeming odd, so she acquiesced, though Michael had noticed her curious glance when he left earlier with his laptop in tow. At last, the lights dimmed slightly to direct attention to the stage. A hush fell over the tables. Julia took the podium first, welcoming everyone. She was in her element, voice confident and gracious. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. "Your support has brought healing hands to countless communities in need. This gala is our way of celebrating you, our donors, partners, and friends who make our mission possible." Applause followed on cue. Michael stood at the side of the stage, hands clasped behind him, appearing calm. Inside, his heart pounded. He caught Daniel's silhouette at a table near the front, casually sipping his drink, utterly unaware of what was coming. After a few more warm-up remarks, Julia said, "Transparency and accountability are core values at Healing Hands. In that spirit, I'm proud to share that we recently undertook an independent financial audit, just to ensure we're being the best stewards of your generosity." Michael saw a flicker in her smile, perhaps nerves, before she continued. "Here to say a few words about that, and to express our gratitude is someone you all know well. My husband and our volunteer audit liaison, Michael Grant." Polite applause rose as Michael stepped forward. Julia yielded the podium to him, giving him a brief look. Was it uncertainty he saw in her eyes? It vanished behind her public smile as she retreated a step. Michael surveyed the room of expectant faces. He saw Ellen and several board members at their table, giving him encouraging nods. He saw Julia a few paces off, hands clasped in front of her, watching. He even saw Daniel, leaning back in his chair with a faintly bored expression. "Good evening," Michael began, his voice carrying through the speakers with a steady calm. "On behalf of Healing Hands, I want to echo Julia's thanks. Your generosity truly fuels this mission." He allowed a small smile. "As Julia mentioned, we've recently completed an independent audit of the organization's finances. I had the privilege of coordinating that process." There were some proud murmurs and smiles among donors. Audits signaled responsibility. Michael continued, "Tonight, in the spirit of transparency, we'd like to share some highlights from that audit with you. After all, every one of you deserves to know exactly how your donations are being used to save lives." From the corner of his eye, he noticed Julia's smile stiffen just a touch. Daniel had sat up a bit straighter. Michael pressed the remote in his hand. Behind him, two large projection screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. Up came the title slide he had prepared. Healing Hands Independent Financial Review, Key Findings. The text was simple and innocuous at a glance, but Michael felt a pulse of anticipation through the room at the unexpected visual aid. He spoke evenly. "I'd like to invite Alan Ross, lead partner from Ross and Myers Accounting, to join me." His firm conducted the review. Alan, the auditor, climbed the stage and took the mic Michael offered. Alan cleared his throat, the epitome of professional gravitas. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. Ladies and gentlemen, I won't bore you with too many numbers, but I'm pleased to report that our audit affirmed many strengths in Healing Hands' financial operations. We found that donor funds were generally used for their intended programs, and internal controls are mostly sound." There was light applause. Julia nodded with a measured expression, but her shoulders did not relax. She likely sensed a but coming, and indeed, Alan hesitated strategically. "However," Alan continued, "we did identify some discrepancies that we feel important to bring to light, in line with full transparency." At the word discrepancies, the room's atmosphere shifted palpably. A collective hush, a held breath. On the screens, a new slide appeared, labeled Expenses and Discrepancies. A side-by-side table showed two columns, one from the official records as reported and one labeled Audit Findings. Under Staff Training and Development, the number reported was significantly lower than the audit found. A red highlight circled the difference. Alan explained, "In reviewing expenses, we discovered that certain consultant fees were misclassified under training. Specifically, payments to an external consultant were roughly double the standard market rate and incorrectly labeled." He used a laser pointer to indicate the projected figures. "But we have to tie it to impact on Ethan if we want this to fly in family court." Brennan nodded. "I was thinking the same. She's been neglecting her evenings with him. I can document that. And I have the footage of her coming home well after his bedtime on school nights." Carla stirred a packet of sugar into her coffee thoughtfully. The overhead neon light reflected off the tired Formica tabletop. "If you present it right, a judge could see this as a pattern of irresponsible parenting," she said. "Especially with a 7-year-old. Judges don't like anything that disrupts a child's routine or well-being." She paused, then fixed Brennan with a gentle but firm look. "Brennan, are you sure you want to go this far? Once we pull this trigger, it's going to get ugly. This isn't just gathering evidence anymore. It's war." Brennan stared at the steam rising from his cup. War. The word felt apartment. It turns out that on multiple occasions, site visit travel expenses were reimbursed to that same consultant on nights when there were supposedly strategy meetings. On the screen, lines connected dates on a calendar to entries like consultant lodging downtown loft, 2 nights, with corresponding dates that donors would not recognize, but Julia and Daniel surely would. Murmurs grew louder. One donor near the front spoke aloud. "What is this about?" Michael's voice remained measured. "The evidence suggests those expenses were not legitimate business activities. They coincided with times when no official meetings were scheduled." He let the implication hang in the air. He would not detail the personal affair here. It wasn't necessary. The financial impropriety itself was enough scandal for this audience, and those who could read between the lines might suspect the rest. As whispers spread, he advanced to the final slide. Across it were a few excerpted lines of an email, blown up large enough to read. Julia instantly recognized it. Her strangled gasp was audible only to those nearest her, but Michael heard it like a siren. The email snippet read, "I promise you'll get equity in the new for-profit venture. More hands-on fundraising indeed. J." A collective gasp rose from the audience as they processed the meaning. Equity? For-profit venture? Hands-on fundraising? The genteel donors looked genuinely shocked. They were seeing evidence of something deeply inappropriate, an attempt to personally profit from the charity's work. Julia's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. She was frozen, eyes locked on the screen. Daniel's face flushed crimson. He half rose as if considering an exit, but the eyes of several people at his table, colleagues, Donors who now realized his involvement pinned him in place. Alan Ross leaned back into the mic for his closing statement, voice solemn. At the conclusion of our audit, we delivered these findings to the Board of Directors of Healing Hands. The board is committed to taking all necessary corrective actions. We share this with you tonight because as donors and stakeholders, you deserve transparency above all. When nonprofits betray their mission for personal gain, that's the real scandal. But transparency is the first step to rebuilding trust. The pianist, sensing the tension, had long stopped playing. An uneasy silence fell, broken only by scattered sharp intakes of breath and the rustling of programs at tables. All around the room, dozens of pairs of eyes turned toward Julia and toward Daniel. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was as if the entire gala hung in suspended animation, the weight of revelation paralyzing everyone. Then, the whispers began, growing louder into a rumble of conversation. A donor in a silver gown stood up, glaring at Julia with betrayed fury. One of the major benefactors, an elderly man with a cane, shook his head in disappointment, visibly hurt. Julia finally found motion. "Everyone," she croaked, stepping toward the microphone with a trembling hand outstretched, perhaps to seize it and explain. But Michael subtly slid himself in her way, not aggressively, but firmly. He met her eyes with a steady gaze that brooked no intervention. Julia's face crumpled, and she halted, realizing there was nothing she could say to undo what everyone had seen with their own eyes. Daniel, meanwhile, quietly edged toward the side exit of the ballroom, as a few people near him pulled away their chairs to clear a path. It did not go unnoticed. A murmur followed him. The shame on his face was evident, even as he tried to maintain a shred of composure. No one stopped him when he slipped out. He had no official role to answer to the crowd, and perhaps staying would have only invited public fury. On stage, Michael slowly stepped back, away from the podium, yielding the spotlight. He had said what he needed to say. Alan gave him a supportive nod and left the stage to join the board members, who were already convening in urgent whispers at their table. Julia remained standing up front, isolated in a harsh spotlight that seemed suddenly too bright. Her eyes glistened with tears she was fighting to hold back. She opened her mouth again as if to speak, then closed it. In the audience, someone clapped, an awkward, singular sound, quickly aborted. No one quite knew what to do in this moment of public betrayal. Michael felt a mixture of grim satisfaction and deep sorrow. This was the reckoning that had to happen. Julia had made her choices, and now here they were. As he surveyed the scene one last time before stepping off the stage, he saw not only the shock and anger on the donors' faces, but also a few expressions of sympathy cast his way. Many knew him, respected him. A few likely connected the dots that this scandal was personal for him too. He gave the audience a polite nod, his role in the drama complete for now. The murmur in the room swelled as conversations broke out at every table. Julia, trembling, looked at Michael pleadingly, a silent tear escaping down her cheek. But Michael turned and descended the stage steps, leaving her standing there to face the consequences that were now inevitable. 4. The ethical aftermath. The gala ended abruptly in the wake of the revelations. There was no triumphant closing toast, no celebratory dancing. Many donors left quietly, murmuring among themselves. A few, more loyal to the cause than shaken by scandal, approached board members for reassurance that their contributions would still make a difference. Ellen Pierce and other board members promised a thorough house cleaning and thanked donors for their understanding in this difficult time. Julia had slipped away from the podium area as soon as Michael stepped off stage. By the time Michael scanned the room again, she was gone, likely whisked into a side room by a couple of board members for an emergency discussion. Daniel, too, had vanished after his hasty exit. The shining event Julia had worked so hard on had dissolved into damage control and quiet outrage. Michael didn't stick around much longer himself. After ensuring that Ellen and the board had matters in hand, he retrieved his coat and left the ballroom. He felt numb as he walked out into the cool night air. This was not how the night was supposed to end for any of them. Yet, it was the only ending that felt just. Still, as he drove home, the adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation ebbed, and a deep sadness settled in. The marriage he had once treasured lay in ruins, exposed under the harshest light possible. Later that night, near midnight, Michael's phone buzzed with a message from Ellen. Board met. Julia removed as ED effective immediately. Unanimous vote. We'll discuss details with you tomorrow. He closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was done. Julia's tenure at Healing Hands was over. There was a finality in that text that made everything hit home. She hadn't just hurt him. She had lost everything she'd built in her career in one night. The next morning, events unfolded swiftly. The board of Healing Hands convened a formal emergency meeting at their office. Michael was invited to attend, partly as a witness to the audit findings and partly because, in the chaos, he had become one of the few people the board fully trusted. Julia was there too, at least initially. She sat at the end of the conference table, looking small and drawn, a stark contrast to her usual commanding presence. Dark circles under her eyes told of a sleepless night. The atmosphere was tense and somber. The board's lawyer was present by phone. Ellen Pierce led the proceedings, her voice devoid of the warmth it usually held. Given the gravity of the audit findings and the breach of ethical conduct, Ellen said carefully, this board has voted to remove Julia Grant from the position of executive director, effective immediately. This decision was unanimous. She glanced around. All board members present, some still in shock, some in anger, nodded or murmured agreement. Julia bowed her head. She didn't fight it. How could she? The evidence was incontrovertible. With a shaky voice, she spoke, I understand. I take responsibility. For everything. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she attempted to maintain composure. I'm deeply sorry for the harm I've caused. Some board members visibly struggled with their emotions. A mix of disappointment and pity. Julia had been a colleague and friend to them. To see her fall from grace like this was painful, but the betrayal could not be overlooked. There's also the matter of your employment contract, interjected the lawyer over speakerphone. Given the findings of malfeasance and violation of organizational policy, the board's position is that you are being terminated for cause. As such, any severance clauses in your contract are void. Julia swallowed hard. She had negotiated a generous severance package in better days, but she didn't even blink now at hearing it was gone. I won't contest that, she said quietly. I will waive any severance claim. Perhaps she knew she had no bargaining power, or perhaps guilt kept her from arguing. Either way, her once proud voice was now resigned. Michael watched all this from the corner of the room, silent. He had deliberately chosen a seat slightly apart, not wanting to appear he was gloating or leading the charge. In truth, he felt no triumph watching Julia like this, only a heavy sorrow. She didn't look at him, and he didn't seek her eyes either. The board then turned to the topic of Daniel Wu. Although not an employee, his consulting contract with Healing Hands was terminated effective immediately via a formal notice. Word had already begun spreading beyond the gala. By morning, several local philanthropic circles were buzzing with the news that a major charity's leadership had been caught in an ethics scandal. Daniel's biggest currency, his reputation, was spent. Board member after board member reported back that they had fielded calls and texts from other organizations. Is it true? Did your consultant really cheat the charity? The philanthropy community can be tight-knit, and a serious breach like this can mark someone for life. Daniel has resigned all his current engagements with partner organizations, Ellen noted, reading from an email on her tablet. He hadn't waited to be formally blacklisted. Pressure from disillusioned clients had pushed him to step down before he could be fired. Major foundations quietly updated their lists of approved consultants, striking his name out. Informal conversations ensured no one would touch him for future projects, at least in their region. One board member, a prominent businesswoman, shook her head. A man so talented, but he threw it away. None of my contacts will work with him now, not after this. There was still the question of whether to refer the matter to law enforcement or state regulators, given potential fraud. The board's lawyer advised that the charity could pursue legal action for any misappropriated funds. However, this was a delicate decision. Publicly dragging this into court might prolong the bad press and hurt the organization further. In the end, the board decided to settle matters quietly. Julia would sign an agreement admitting wrongdoing, repay any clearly misused funds, such as those travel expenses, and in exchange the charity would not press charges. It was a painful compromise, letting her off the legal hook to protect the organization's future. Throughout this discussion, Julia nodded numbly, agreeing to whatever terms were laid out. She seemed broken, beyond fight. As the meeting drew to a close, the conversation turned to the future of Healing Hands. The donors needed reassurance that the mission would continue honorably. The staff needed leadership. The organization couldn't sail rudderless with the executive director position suddenly vacant. Ellen addressed Michael directly for the first time that morning, pulling the room's focus toward him. Michael, we owe you a great debt for bringing these issues to light and doing so in a way that aimed to preserve the integrity of Healing Hands. He shifted in his seat. I only did what I thought was right. The mission is too important to let anything compromise it. Ellen offered a tight but genuine smile. Precisely, which is why I and the board would like to ask something of you. The other board members leaned in. Some already wore expressions of approval, as if they knew what was coming. Will you step in as interim executive director of Healing Hands while we navigate this transition? We understand the sacrifice we're asking. Your own organization would have to accommodate your leave, but you are uniquely positioned to steady the ship. The donors trust you. The staff knows you. And after last night, everyone sees you as a man of principle. Michael was momentarily taken aback. He hadn't thought that far ahead. His plan had been about revealing the truth and stopping the wrongdoing, not about his own role afterwards. He glanced around the table. He saw earnest hope in their faces. Healing Hands was at a precipice. They needed someone trustworthy at the helm immediately, or risk losing donor confidence and staff morale. He also saw Julia, still sitting there quietly. At Ellen's proposal, Julia finally looked up at Michael, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of emotions: regret, sorrow, perhaps even a hint of relief that someone capable might repair what she damaged. Michael thought of the clinics that Healing Hands built, the people they served. He thought of the trust donors placed in this charity, which he had helped restore by unearthing the truth. His own nonprofit had other capable financial officers who could cover for him for a while, and his board there would likely support him doing this, given the circumstances. This wasn't how he envisioned taking a leadership role, but it felt almost like a responsibility he couldn't turn away from. He straightened in his chair. If I can help Healing Hands get back on its feet, he said slowly, then yes, I'll do it. On an interim basis, just until you find the right long-term leader. A collective sigh of relief passed around the room. Ellen reached over and shook Michael's hand firmly. Thank you, Michael. We'll formalize this immediately. And just like that, within 24 hours of the gala explosion, Michael found himself stepping into Julia's now vacant role. It was surreal and bittersweet. He would be occupying her office, carrying forward the mission she had nearly derailed. As people stood up and gathered their things, the board members individually thanked Michael, some patting him on the shoulder. One said quietly, "We're sorry it had to be you who uncovered this, but we're grateful you did." He simply nodded. Julia remained seated until most others had left the room. Michael prepared to leave as well, when he heard her voice softly. Michael? It was the first time she had directly addressed him since the gala. He paused, hand on the back of a chair, but did not sit. He looked at her, taking in the woman he had known so well, now looking almost like a stranger in her misery. I'm so sorry, Julia whispered. In a world of whispers and secrets, Brennan had been the one man who refused to look away. And in doing so, he had delivered a justice as precise and unforgiving as any verdict he'd ever secured in a courtroom. Then, Brennan would return the photo to its place in the safe, turn the key, and take a final slow sip of his bourbon. He would gaze out at the quiet city lights of Cleveland and let the stillness of the night seep in. The ordeal was over. The wounds had scarred over. What had been broken was not restored. Some things can never be. But a measure of balance had been regained. It was a hard-won peace, etched with sorrow and tempered by loss. A bittersweet justice, but justice all the same. Their conversations were non-existent. Michael spent long hours at Healing Hand's office, diving into the work of stabilizing the organization. Julia stayed mostly in the guest room when she was home, avoiding him out of shame and grief. They moved around each other carefully, as if any small interaction might shatter the fragile detente keeping them civil. By Thursday of that week, Michael had made up his mind about the one thing left between them: the marriage. There was no salvaging it. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, could not be pieced back together, at least not for him. He had consulted a divorce attorney quietly on Monday, just after taking on the interim director role. The lawyer had drawn up the papers swiftly, given the circumstances. That evening, Michael asked Julia to talk in the study, one of the few times he'd addressed her directly. The study was a small room in their house lined with books and awards from their careers. How many nights had they sat there together, planning charity events, or reviewing each other's speeches, dreaming of the future? Now it would host their final chapter. Julia entered hesitantly and sat in the leather chair across from Michael's desk. She looked nervous, eyes darting to a neat stack of documents on the desk between them. Michael's face was solemn, unreadable. He had placed 3 items on the wooden surface: a bound copy of the independent audit report, a printout of the board's official meeting minutes removing her from leadership, and the glossy program from the Hope Gala, its cover photo of smiling clinic children, now a painful reminder of the night everything fell apart. Michael, you wanted to talk? She began softly. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying earlier. He nodded and gestured to the papers. I think everything that needs to be said is here. His tone was calm, almost gentle, but with a formality that made Julia flinch. She glanced down at the items. Her eyes lingered on the gala program, then the audit report. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, she whispered. I know I destroyed us. I have no excuse. I was wrong. So wrong. Michael inhaled slowly, steadying himself. Hearing her acknowledge it stirred a swirl of feelings: anger, sorrow, even a flicker of empathy for her misery. But he hardened his resolve. He reached into a folder and pulled out another set of papers, the divorce documents. Gently, he laid them atop the other items on the desk. Julia's breath caught as she recognized what they were. Her hand moved to cover her mouth, stifling a sob. Michael, please, she choked out. He raised a hand, not in anger but to pause her words. Julia, I'm not here to argue or punish you with harsh words, he said quietly. I think we're past that. He looked directly at her, his eyes heavy with disappointment and hurt. I just need you to understand one thing. She lowered her hand and nodded faintly, tears spilling freely now. Michael spoke softly, voice trembling despite his attempt to keep it even. I believed in this mission, and in us. You chose otherwise. At that, Julia broke into quiet weeping, face in her hands. Michael's words hung in the air, cutting and true. He had distilled their entire collapse into those 2 sentences. They had built a life on shared ideals and mutual trust. Julia's choices had betrayed both the mission they served and the marriage they had vowed to honor. There was nothing more to discuss. After a moment, Julia tried to compose herself. She wiped her eyes and reached out as if to touch his hand across the desk, but stopped short. fingers curling back. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "For everything. I never meant—" Her voice cracked. "I never wanted to hurt you, or the charity. I lost sight of things, of what mattered. I don't know who I was during all that, but it wasn't the real me." Her pleas came tumbling out, a final desperate attempt to explain the unexplainable. If I could take it back, God, I would. I was foolish and weak. Michael listened, silent. Once, he would have rushed to comfort her when she cried. Now he felt removed, as if watching from behind a thick glass. He believed that she was regretful. He could hear the genuine remorse in her voice. But it didn't change the outcome. "I'm sorry too," he said, surprising her. She looked up, puzzled through her tears. "I'm sorry that it came to this. Sorry that the woman I loved and the partner I trusted is gone. Because I don't recognize you anymore, Julia." His voice was sad, resigned. The Julia I knew would never have done these things. She winced, fresh pain crossing her face. "I know," she said. "That Julia, she's lost. I wish I could be her again. I wish I could undo everything that's happened and still be standing beside you, doing good like we always did." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly. "But I can't. I know I can't." Michael felt moisture in his own eyes now. He blinked it away, keeping his composure. "I think it's best we both move on," he said gently, tapping the divorce papers with his fingers. "This is an uncontested filing. It cites irreconcilable differences." He spared them both the word adultery, though legally in some states that could have been cited, it didn't matter now. "It outlines a fair division of what we own. I'm not interested in punishing you beyond this. I just want a clean break." Julia reached for the papers with trembling hands. As she scanned the document, a tear dropped onto the page, smudging the ink of her name. "Michael, do you really want this?" she asked, voice small, even though she clearly knew the answer. "After everything? There's really no chance?" He felt a pang in his chest. How many nights over the past weeks had he lain awake tormented by that very question, hoping somehow this nightmare would end differently? But that hope had died the moment he opened those emails and saw the truth in black and white. Quietly, he replied, "No. There's no coming back from this, Julia. Too much has been broken." He sighed deeply. "You made a choice. And now I have to make mine." Julia closed her eyes, nodding through a fresh wave of tears. For a few seconds, the only sound in the study was the ticking of the old mantel clock and her soft sobs. Finally, with a shaking hand, she picked up a pen from the desk. In silence, she signed the divorce papers where indicated. Each stroke of her signature seemed to drain the energy from her, as though with each letter she was acknowledging the finality. When she was done, she capped the pen and placed it down carefully. "Thank you," Michael said, accepting the signed documents. He didn't truly feel thankful for any of this, but it was a polite formality. Perhaps he was thanking her for not fighting him on it, for not dragging out the inevitable. Julia stood slowly. She looked around the study, her gaze lingering on a framed photo on the bookshelf. A picture of them together at the opening of a new clinic overseas, both smiling, arms around each other, full of hope and pride. She let out a shuddering breath and then turned back to Michael. "I truly am sorry," she murmured again. Michael gave a faint nod. He had nothing left to say. Any forgiveness he might find for her, if ever, was far off in the future. Right now, all he could do was close this chapter and distance himself from the pain. He gathered the papers and the evidence files from the desk. The physical weight of them in his hands felt heavy, symbolic of the emotional burden he'd carried. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the study. Julia didn't follow. He left her standing there, the woman who had been his partner in life, now simply a sorrowful figure in a silent room. As he reached the doorway, He paused briefly, perhaps expecting some last word or hoping for some closure beyond apologies. But nothing more came. Michael gently pulled the study door closed behind him. The soft click of the latch felt like the final seal on 12 years of marriage. There was no drama, no shouted accusations or begs for another chance. Just a quiet, devastating conclusion. No redemption, only resolution. Epilogue. 6 months later. The late summer sun filtered through the windows of a modest community hall where Healing Hands was hosting a new kind of fundraiser. Instead of the usual fancy gala, Michael had organized an afternoon Ask Me Anything town hall with donors and volunteers. No black tie, no elaborate fanfare, just honest conversation, lemonade and cookies, and a few poster boards showcasing clinic projects. Michael stood at the front in shirt sleeves, a transparent podium before him, and about 50 donors seated in folding chairs. Many of these people had attended that fateful gala half a year ago, and notably, many still continued to support Healing Hands. In fact, some said their trust in the organization had grown, seeing how openly the issues were addressed and fixed. A middle-aged woman in the audience raised her hand. She was a longtime donor who had been shocked by the scandal. Michael pointed to her, inviting her question. "With everything that happened," she began, "how can we be sure something like that won't happen again? I appreciate the changes, but trust is hard to rebuild." There was a murmur of agreement in the crowd. Michael nodded, understanding her concern completely. This was exactly why he wanted this forum. "That's a fair question," he replied, his voice clear and earnest. "And you're right. Trust is hard to rebuild. That's why we've implemented concrete measures to make sure Healing Hands stays on the right path." He clicked a slide on a simple projector behind him. It displayed a checklist, rotating independent audits. Every 6 months, quarterly financial reports published online for all donors, open board conda sessions, bi-monthly whistleblower hotline, anonymous reporting channel. "We now have independent auditors reviewing our books twice a year," Michael explained. "Not because we expect problems, but because we want to catch anything early and prove that we have nothing to hide. Also, every quarter, we publish detailed donor reports online. Anyone can see exactly where every dollar is going. No more vague categories or hidden expenses. Total transparency." The audience listened intently. A few people nodded, visibly reassured. Michael continued. "We've also instituted open conda sessions like this one every couple of months, sometimes online, sometimes in person. You can ask the board or me anything. If something seems off, we want to hear about it. And we set up an anonymous whistleblower hotline for staff and volunteers, so if anyone inside notices wrongdoing, they can report it without fear. Healing Hands is determined to be a model of accountability." The woman who'd asked the question smiled softly now. "Thank you, Michael. It sounds like you've done a lot." A man in the front row, a major donor, spoke up without even raising his hand, his tone friendly. "I just want to say, what you did took guts. Most people would have swept it under the rug to avoid embarrassment, but you faced it head on. That's why I doubled my pledge this year." Several people murmured agreement, and even a bit of applause broke out. Michael felt a warmth in his chest. It wasn't pride exactly, but a sense of validation. He raised his hands modestly. "Thank you, but the real thanks goes to all of you for sticking with us. Doing the right thing isn't always easy or comfortable, but it was necessary. Healing Hands has a mission that's bigger than any one person or scandal. Together, we're ensuring that mission stays true." As the session wrapped up, Michael spent time shaking hands and chatting with attendees in the casual, sunlit room. There were no more whispered doubts, no more wary looks, just constructive conversations about upcoming projects and how to make the community clinics even better. One elderly donor patted Michael on the back as he departed, saying kindly, "You did the right thing, son. Hard as it was. We trust you." Those words meant the world to Michael. Walking to his car afterward, he took a moment to reflect on the journey. The past half year had been the most challenging of his life. Guiding healing hands through the aftermath, earning back trust step by step, had been a monumental task. He had served as interim executive director for 4 of those months, until the board found a capable permanent leader to take the helm. He then returned to his own organization, but remained on call as an advisor to Healing Hands' new leadership to ensure the reforms endured. During that time, he poured his heart into reforming policies and exemplifying transparency at every turn. There were days it was exhausting, when anger or sadness threatened to resurface, like when he'd stumble upon an old photo of Julia in the office, or when he had to explain to a new partner why the previous leadership left. But each time, Michael reminded himself that confronting the truth was far better than living with a comforting lie. And what of Julia and Daniel? In the immediate aftermath, they had all but vanished from the circles they once frequented. Julia, after signing the divorce papers, moved out of their home and went to stay with her sister in another state for a while. Word got around that she was doing some consulting work under the radar in a field far removed from charities, maybe trying to rebuild her life out of the spotlight. Daniel similarly left town. The last Michael heard, Daniel sold his consulting firm, what was left of it, and was rumored to be working in the private sector where his name might not be immediately recognized. They had become cautionary tales in the nonprofit community. Whenever their story was spoken of, it was with regret and a lesson about the corrupting lure of personal gain. Michael bore them no active ill will at this point. He didn't spend time thinking about them if he could help it. The initial blaze of hurt and anger had cooled to embers. He had channeled those feelings into something productive, ensuring no one could easily betray this cause again. On a personal front, life was simpler now. He lived alone in the house that once was their home. It was quieter, lonelier perhaps, but also peaceful in a way. No more creeping doubts or sleepless nights awaiting a spouse who might not truly be at work. He found solace in small routines, morning runs to clear his head, evenings reading on the porch. Friends from the community checked in often, inviting him to dinners or volunteering alongside him, making sure he never truly felt alone. One Saturday, as he tidied up old files at home, Michael stumbled upon a forgotten framed quote that he and Julia had received as a gift early in their marriage. It read, "The truth will set you free." At the time it was given, they had seen it as a simple nod to the honesty they promised each other. Now, the words carried a heavier, deeper meaning. The truth had indeed set things free. It had broken apart their marriage and exposed wrongs, but it also liberated Michael from living in deception and cleared the path for Healing Hands to thrive without corruption. He decided to hang that frame up again, this time in his own office at work as a daily reminder. In the end, Michael found a measure of peace. He hadn't wanted any of this to happen, but given the hand he was dealt, he had acted according to his principles. The nonprofit was healthier and more transparent than ever. Donors and staff alike spoke of a new era for Healing Hands, one where trust was not just requested, but earned over and over again. As for Michael's personal life, that was a chapter still unwritten. Perhaps one day he would meet someone new, someone who shared his values and would help rebuild the idea of a marriage on truth. Or perhaps he would remain on his own for a time, content in the knowledge that he stayed true to himself. Either way, he felt vindicated. He had done right by the mission and by his own moral compass. Standing in his office at twilight, interim title gone, but influence still very present, Michael looked out at the fading sun. The world outside moved on, cars passing, people heading home, unaware of the quiet triumph playing out in this man's life. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Unflinching truth. It had cost him dearly, but it also became his salvation. In exposing Julia's betrayal and holding Daniel accountable, Michael saved a charity's integrity and reclaimed his own sense of purpose. The marriage he once had was over, but in its place was a life rebuilt on honesty and honor. Michael picked up a new project file on his desk, a plan for expanding clinics into rural areas next year, one of the initiatives he had promised donors. He flipped it open, heart steady and hopeful about the good that could still be done. Sometimes heroes are not warriors on a battlefield, he mused, but ordinary people who simply refused to allow wrongdoing to go unchecked. Michael Grant would likely never call himself a hero, but those who knew of his story did. He was the man who did not flinch from the truth, who chose principle over comfort, and who in doing so helped countless others by keeping a noble mission pure. And that was a legacy he could live with.